accused. And we have to welcome that. And I think even in State House, in the Treasury, there has to be an appreciation that for the first time in several years, millions of Kenyans are now following something called the taxation bill, the appropriations bill, and so on.
Expenditure.
Yeah, and maybe let me just, because yesterday was Sunday, let me just say that, even, Luke 23:2 will tell us that Jesus Christ was actually tortured excruciatingly and was a victim of extrajudicial killings because he was accused of running a tax revolt. So for all the Christians out there and anybody who, takes inspiration from Christianity, it's important to say that actually engaging in taxation is critical for a country. And that is the expression of Article 1. I think the third point I wanted to say is that, numbers aside, and, I think what the president, that was probably my best president's speech out of all the ones that we have seen in the last 2 weeks, because I saw him beginning to regain balance. He beginning to speak to the concerns of those that are championing the third liberation. I think there are a number of things that the movement have called for. The first is that the structure of government is too bloated, it's too indulgent at a time like this. So it's not just the offices of the First Ladies, it's really looking at the structure of cabinet, the quality of cabinet, all the advisors, and I think to some extent the president went as far as he could in that initial statement. But I think, as we saw in, I think it was the Standard last week, a headline that said perhaps this is the last supper for the existing cabinet secretaries. I think we have to say that the cabinet ministry of secretaries was a terrible idea. How it was generated in a context where we were essentially not able to balance budgets is just unfathomable. So that's the first point. The second point is really around addressing corruption and wastage. It's not just about the refreshments, the travel costs, and the confidential budget. It's also being more transparent about the way that government uses public resources. And if we're saying that at this time we don't have a lot of public resources, then there has to be a bold approach to managing transparently figures. Let me just give you an example. Today's newspaper, front page of the Standard. There is a reference to the conflict of interest bill. Mm-hmm. And I just want to say that for all those senators who are begging our forgiveness over the last week or so, they have to essentially withdraw the conflict of interest bill. If there is an indication of good faith on the part of parliamentarians, it has to be to remove the changes that essentially have mutilated this bill to a point that actually it is now a conflict of interest bill. It is not even an anti-conflict of interest bill. It is one that actually perpetuates theft, graft,
You're referring to the Daily Nation, right?
Yeah. That is the Daily Nation, for viewers. Mm. The third point, I think that Gen Z and the Third Liberation activists have called for, and I saw a very good action plan that was released on Friday. And of course, because the Gen Z movement is so leaderful, we're not sure which part of the movement this came from, but it had some good ideas. Let me just speak to it a little bit. The third area was around lowering the tax burden on Kenyans. Right, particularly those that are paying taxes. What started as a progressive taxation approach has now generated into a tax everything approach. Consumption, production. The next thing would be a tax on breathing clean air or something like that. We also have to recognize that the young folks have told us that they want to see greater services. They want to see employment of teachers, particularly the junior school interns. Today there is potentially a strike or a protest that has been called by medical interns. We hope that it will be peaceful. It will be allowed to essentially approach Afia House to present their petition. And we have to say that, that's what Kenyans want. Kenyans want investment in agriculture. They want investments in health and education particularly. They want investment in jobs for Kenyans, not to have Kenyans have to go abroad in order to be employed, but to be employed in their own country. In fact, coming back to Dishu's point, we don't want Kenyans to go and work in Britain. Okay. Right? We want Kenyans to work here. It's a very simple action plan. And I think the thing we have to say to the president is, please do not manage this moment by commission. Do not set up a series of commissions that are temporal, expensive, and will essentially drag this country for another 3 to 6 months in terms of the actions that need to be taken. Please take the executive, use the executive power that you have to take the actions that are required.